In a few minutes with Maria Roach of the PBS series The Contenders. Her production company and Oxy have contributed to the PBS series that features Jesse Jackson and Gary Hart, two people that I admire and have worked for and worked with in the past, going back to 1984 and 88. And at the same time, we will talk about those individuals and people like Jerry Austin and Frank Watkins, who had a big role in Jesse Jackson's 88 campaign run. Mark Taylor-Canfield of Seattle, where our song of the day originated, will be with us at 4:30. We'll talk a lot, including Julian Assange and what's coming out of WikiLeaks these days. It is Nirvana. It is Come As You Are. It was the theme of the early 90s in grunge. And it was real. It wasn't a put-on. It wasn't Milli Vanilli. It was real rock and roll, and it changed a lot of minds. And we need to continue that spirit. Of course, the tragedy of Kurt Cobain, suicide, or some people think murder. In 1994, I was driving down a highway outside of Orlando, Florida, and listening to this song, and then on came the word that he had taken his life. But the spirit of Seattle, and we'll get into this with Mark Taylor-Canfield a little bit later, continues, and it's independent music, and it's the independent spirit. Of course, it gave us some great music with other bands, Soundgarden, Pearl Jam, of course, and led to Dave Grohl, who was the drummer of this band, to the Foo Fighters, which, of course, yours truly is a very big fan of as well. So, and there were numerous other bands that were part of that grunge movement in the early 1990s and beyond. And, of course, flannel became in, even in 100-degree weather in the early 90s as well. Too hot in the summertime for flannel, my friends. But it was the in thing. Well, I hope that candidates, Hillary Clinton and others running for Congress, come as they are. If you're a progressive, state that you are progressive. If you are a conservative, state that you are conservative. And don't lie to America. Don't say something that you're not just to get elected. I understand that it's all about getting elected, but we have to govern. And we've had enough people bamboozle us over the last 30 or 40 years, and we need the real thing. One of the reasons why I was a Bernie Sanders fan. So I hope we get that spirit, and I hope we don't lose that spirit between now and November 8th and then beyond. As I said, a lot of work to be done in your neighborhood. It's the Jeff Santos Show, 772-925-8206. You can email me, jeff@revolutionboston.com. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter at Jeff Santos Show. Our next guest. Welcome back. It is the Jeff Santos Show, 34 minutes past the hour. Which means on this Tuesday afternoon, it is time for us to go west. As far west as you can go. Next step, Canada. That's why it's a very special day when we talk to our next guest, freelance journalist. Catch him out on Capitol Hill Times, Daily Kos, and right here on the Jeff Santos Show every Tuesday at 4:30. He's a guitarist, he's a great journalist, and he's a great friend of the program. Mr. Mark Taylor-Canfield joins us live from Seattle. How you doing, Mark?
Hey, Jeff. Thanks so much for that shout-out to the Seattle music scene. And I should also mention Democracy Watch News. I'm a contributing editor for an international news organization, independent news organization. So we need more of those kind of people around. And Seattle is a great music town, and if folks want to check out my music videos or download some of my free tracks, feel free to check out my work with the Galaxy Machine. We have a bunch of YouTube videos up, and also the Revel Saints. So you can go to YouTube and SoundCloud and check out what I've been up to. And I'm right in the middle of licensing and publishing a bunch of new music with the Revel Saints, and also I'm finishing up my novel, which is a film noir private detective story set in Seattle in 1947. And I credit my grandfather for turning me on to those old vintage detective radio plays and movies, and writers like Raymond Chandler, Mickey Spillane, Dashiell Hammett, Damon Runyon, and the rest of those great writers. A lot of them who also wrote the radio plays, which is great. And each one of them had their stories set in their own hometowns, which would be New York City for Mickey Spillane, and then San Francisco, Los Angeles. But I think Seattle needs its own detective story writer, so I'm going to do it.
There you go. You're going to volunteer, man. Good for you, my friend.
I have a friend
You're
who
a
does
busy
graphic
man.
novels, too. Yeah, my friend who's a great artist, he got a full scholarship to UCLA Fine Arts School. He wants to do a graphic novel with me on it, so we're having a lot of fun. Not getting much sleep, but that's the way it is when you're trying to follow your creative pursuits, you know. You have to stay up all night sometimes in the studio to get anything done, but, you know, that's the life of a musician and a writer, I guess. You know.
You got that, my friend. Well, we got lots to talk about. Obviously, is a debate tonight. We're in 34 days and counting on the election between Secretary Clinton and Mr. Donald Trump. I want to get your thoughts here on this whole thing going on with Wikileaks. This back and forth, the threats supposedly that are coming from Hillary Clinton, the drone, Mr. Assange in London there. They wanted to do it at the Ecuadorian embassy where he's been hiding out, but they didn't want to come out in the balcony because he feared for his life. Some other guy had got caught and shot at nearby the embassy just a few weeks back. And they're going to move it to Berlin, and, it's sort of all kind of in a weird space right now. What is the latest? Because I know you follow a lot of what they do. If you think about it, WikiLeaks is an independent journalist when you think about it. What's your feeling in all this, my friend?
Well, they did talk a lot today at their press briefing on the 10th anniversary of WikiLeaks about their work with journalists around the world. So what they've done is they've opened up a lot of relationships with reporters, with independent and news agencies all across the world. And so a lot of people today in Berlin were expecting another series of revelations on the level of the DNC leaks, but instead Julian Assange and his friends announced that they would be making weekly releases of material, working with journalists around the globe, and he promised to release all of his current information before the November national elections. So some observers were disappointed, and some have accused Assange of grandstanding, but the main issue that the WikiLeaks site at Twitter is posting about is the story of Hillary Clinton allegedly saying or asking why the United States couldn't just use a drone to assassinate Julian Assange. And that revelation has caused a lot of controversy online. And it points out, Jeff, the huge divide in the country over WikiLeaks, because on one side, many democracy advocates laud Assange as a kind of altruistic saint. But on the other side, including the Obama administration and apparently Hillary Clinton, U.S. officials maintain that he is a traitor. And Chelsea Manning also received a similar kind of response from a lot of public officials. So it just points out this huge disconnect, does it mean to be a democracy? And I do have to point out that the United States is ranked 41st in the world in terms of press freedom, according to Reporters Without Borders, an international advocacy group for journalists. And one of the reasons that they cite in their 2016 World Press Freedom Index is the lack of transparency in our own government, and the fact that it's more difficult for reporters in the United States to get information about the workings of their own government than it is in 40 other countries, including Costa Rica and Namibia and Of course, Finland is number one, but it points out this issue of transparency, which has always been a major progressive cause, and it's something that my editor, Dean Edwards at Democracy Watch News, is constantly hitting us over the head with, which is that any progressive movement must embrace transparency. So there you go. Is this release of information an anti-American move by a traitor, or is this a pro-democracy, media democracy movement? And that's where the divide lies, because you have folks on both sides who disagree seriously on this issue about Julian Assange. But today, folks were kind of disappointed that he didn't have any big revelations. And, I watched the press conference. It was very interesting listening to the reporters talk about their relationship with WikiLeaks. And Julian Assange did do a shout out. He's created also another Twitter site as a sort of protective agency for WikiLeaks to counter a lot of what he calls misinformation about the information they're releasing and how they're releasing it. So it was very clear that he was feeling kind of entrenched in needing support from people around the world, and at the same time, saying that he was going to continue to release the information. But as of today, mostly what people are talking about is this drone assassination suggestion, which, by the way, according to a United Nations official, actually, Dr. Agnes Callamard is a United Nations Special Rapporteur on extrajudicial executions, and in an interview with True Pundit, which is the site that actually first released this story about Hillary Clinton's comment, according to Dr. Agnes Callamard, quote, to do so, the state would have to demonstrate an instant overwhelming, leaving no choice of means and no moment of deliberation necessity. This is not only a very high threshold to meet, it is also impossible to see how that could be used or justified in the case of Mr. Julian Assange. So what she's saying is that Julian Assange, according to this one United Nations rapporteur, she does not think that he is a direct threat to the United States. And just to give a little background on that, apparently one of the reasons that Hillary Clinton was so upset with Assange was the fact that his previous 2010 records release divulged secret U.S. documents about the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq. So she was not happy about that and felt like he shouldn't be walking around with no sense of consequences for his behavior. But that's the story right now, Jeff, and that's what people are talking about online and on Twitter.
Well, it's fascinating stuff, and I don't want to open up the phones to our audience to see what they have to say on this. And we'll start out in Minneapolis with our good friend John. You're next with our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield. How you doing, John?
Oh, I'm doing fine. I have to say, I love Seattle, and I think, it's so far to the northwest and the last area of the continental United States that was settled, and there's just something about the place that just seems to favor more creativity, and it's not hidebound. Like, even in the Midwest, there seems like, we've developed a culture of this is the way it's done. And I don't get that impression when I'm in San Francisco or Seattle, and people just seem much more relaxed. I don't know, but maybe it's my own, No,
it's very interesting, John, because being from Minneapolis, and not a lot of people have a connection between Minneapolis and Seattle. There's a highly educated population there. Go ahead about the railroad.
Well, the railroad, James Hill's, Great Northern Railroad opened up Seattle or Washington and, parts of Canada to the rest of the country and linked it with Chicago. And so I think as soon as people discovered that it was much more temperate, they sold the farm and they were on their way. And so it's interesting. There's a lot of families who have connections between, actual connections between the two cities, and the demographics are really similar. There's lots of Scandinavians, I think, and Germans and whatnot. So it's Yeah, it's really interesting. But what I wanted to, talk about, Julian Assange, well, how can he be a traitor? He's not a United States citizen. He's a citizen of Australia, isn't he?
Go ahead. Yeah. Mark, can you hear me?
You didn't hear me? Julian Assange is...
Yeah, he's not American, so the idea of he's being a traitor to me is crazy because he's not American.
I think he thinks of himself as a person who is kind of, bringing to the world information about this great empire that we live in. It was supposed to be a democracy. Somehow it got changed. But, the kinds of things, that we do outside of this country and the wars that we've been involved in and whatnot. And I find it helpful because how am I to assess my own government if everything is cloaked in secrecy? And if anybody dares to, say anything about it, they're thrown in jail under the Espionage Act. Even though they're really not doing any espionage, they're actually, bringing forth information that the public, probably should know. I know the ACLU has determined that in a lot of these cases. I just recently saw, the documentary Snowden, and, I think what really turned him against being an absolute, patriot was the fact that, this was about power and control. It wasn't about furthering the interests of American ideals and democracy. So, this is where we're at. And, I don't know if Hillary Clinton actually said that. I find it hard to believe. But if that is if there's concrete evidence to suggest that, that's kind of too bad.
Yeah. Well, let me get Mark in on here. Mark, can you hear me? Or first of all,
yes.
Okay. Yeah. John made some interesting comparisons. I wanted to get your thoughts first on what he talked about in terms of Seattle, Minneapolis, and I think what Seattle is a fascinating city with newness. The fact is, it's new ideas. I think Bernie Sanders described the Pacific Northwest as the most progressive part of the country. I agree with him on that assessment, and somebody who's proud to be a New Englander, but really I think the progressive politics that come from places like Washington State, Oregon, Northern California, include our friends in Canada as British Columbia in there as well, the whole Cascadia thing. Mark, this to me is something that, it's interesting, a Midwesterner who, of course, is originally from New York, and our caller, John, finds fascinating.
I lived almost 20 years in the Southwest, so I kind of, lived in 3 different regions.
All right.
And
very cool. Well, let me get Mark's thoughts on this, John. Mark, go right ahead. Your reaction.
Well, John is correct that the Seattle area, the Puget Sound area especially, is far away from the Washington Beltway. We have a independent idea about how to organize ourselves here, and everything from San Francisco north to British Columbia tends to be very progressive on environmental issues and social justice issues. So that is correct. Now, some people have accused us of living in a bubble up here, but it's easy to do when it's 2,000 miles to the next major city. So it's our own little world, and there are a lot of utopian communities that began here back even in the 19th century. So it does have a long tradition. And just a shout out to my alma mater. I went to the Evergreen State College, which is considered one of the best small liberal arts colleges west of the Mississippi, and it is definitely its own world as well. It's a very environmentally conscious school where and people have made fun of it too, because occasionally kids go to class in bare feet with their dogs or whatever. But it's definitely
as long as they bring some biscuits for the dogs, that's all I care about. And also, because we're limited on time and I want to get a couple of calls in here, what he also said about Julian Assange, is that what you're hearing on the ground from progressives, that, let's not, whether he is a saint or not, he obviously has opened the doors to a lot of things. Look, Debbie Wasserman Schultz will still be DNC chair if it wasn't for him. Mark?
Well, there are a lot of journalists I know around the world who are very happy that this information is being made available to them. And I really needed to say this, though, that Robbie Mooks, who is a spokesperson for the Hillary Clinton campaign, did field some questions about her alleged quote. And honestly, he just deflected the questions and tried to cast WikiLeaks as a Trump ally, which I think is just ridiculous. But, the political scene right now is that none of the high-profile Democrats want to see any more controversy involving Hillary Clinton. So they're going to try to deflect the questions. And he just refused to respond. In fact, he said that he was loath to comment on anything that WikiLeaks was doing at the moment, which in a way he meant to sort of discredit that organization. But at the same time, it shows you that when this kind of information gets out, there is a lack of refutation by those people in power, because how can you refute something that's been documented? And that's one thing I guess you could say in Assange's favor, is that by waiting to release this information, even though he seems to keep telegraphing his punches, as they say, but in hesitating to release information until he has firsthand sources and the original documents, may actually inevitably help the cause, because WikiLeaks is releasing so much information and has over the last 10 years. This is their 10th anniversary today. So they've released so much information that, by making sure that it's accurate and that they can verify it, that's very important if they really want to create this kind of transparency they're talking about. Because once you release information, if it can be discredited, I mean, we saw what happened with George W. Bush and the stories about him shirking his responsibilities in the National Guard, and what happened to Dan Rather when he accepted information from a source that turned out not to be a first-hand source. So you have to be very careful, but at the same time, I think, for people who are looking for some kind of transparency, this is an age of open source material, and there's not much that can be done about it. This is the information age, and information is power. And
that's for sure. John, thank you for the call. I got to run this, but excellent stuff. And just to be aware, folks, tomorrow we may be doing 2 hours due to a hurricane that is approaching the East Coast. Our headquarters is based in Vero Beach, Florida, and we may be doing 2 hours tomorrow because there'll be no show on Thursday. Just a heads up to all of you out there listening to us. We've been doing just 1 hour this week, but we're going to be looking at 2 hours tomorrow, 4 to 6 p.m., as we have done in the past, because of the impending hurricane. South Carolina seemingly is buckling down, evacuating close to 1 million people. Let's go to the phones again. Chicago, Wayne, you're next with our good friend Mark Taylor-Canfield. How you doing, Wayne?
Hey, how you doing? How you doing, Mark?
Hey, Wayne.
Yes, I think that Julian Assange and Eric Snowden are heroes. Just look at your own phone. You have pre-installed apps that can record your conversations, take pictures of you, record your conversation and send it to a third party, take pictures of you, send it to a third party, your text, messages, email, everything. So I think that is a complete violation of the Constitution. The people in power do not care about the Constitution. They've shredded the Constitution. And here's one more thing. Hillary is mad about the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. She wasn't Secretary of State then. So why is she so mad? She's mad because the neoconservative agenda that she's following, along with people like George Bush, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld. That's why she went into Libya. That's why they're trying to hit Syria. There were 7 countries. Those are 2 of the 7 countries right there. And hooray to people like Julian Assange and Eric Snowden. They are true human beings, true heroes.
Couple of positive fans of Mr. Assange, Mark. Again, do you find this to be the common thread amongst your among people that you talk with on a daily basis, whether they're in the journalism community or outside of it?
I think that transparency in media is going to be one of the future focal points of activism around the world. I mean, we see what's happening in Turkey right now, where they've closed over 20 TV and radio stations, so press freedom there is on the out. I get reports from the Committee to Protect Journalists and Reporters Without Borders, the Reporters Committee to Protect Freedom of Speech every day, and every day somewhere in the world, journalists, bloggers, free speech advocates, netizens is what Reporters Without Borders calls them, are being rounded up, tortured, disappeared, imprisoned, and information is what governments do not want people to have, because it's like a guild. I mean, if you give out your secrets of how you create this structure, then other people can do it, right? And in the United States, you have two major parties that are dominating the political structure, and they certainly don't want alternative or third parties to come along, or some iconoclast like Bernie Sanders to shake it up. But I think what Wayne is saying, and what a lot of progressives in the country and conservatives as well and independents are saying, that that there needs to be a change, and that people are not going to go along to get along anymore. They're going to make important moral, ethical choices at the voting booth, and they're not going to buy this nonsense that the media in the United States, the corporate media and the political parties throw on us to try to convince us, that this neoliberal corporatist structure is what's best for the common good. Because in Seattle, even though it's a great place, I can tell you that those folks who are on the professional level and wealthy are doing great. Folks in the middle class and poor are suffering.
You got that right. Mark, I got to run. Wayne, thank you for the call. Again, tomorrow, probably 2 hours, folks. Want to thank Ron Kiter for producing this broadcast, and help from Sarah Billingsley on the web. Our great team of videographers, Gio and Freddie Santori, of course, Jack Casey and Dee Simpson right here. Stay tuned, folks. My name is Jeff Santos for the best of, including this hour right now. It's my time to say, I gotta go! Is producer with the series airing tonight on PBS at 8 o'clock. I have my DVR set. I am going to be watching that and baseball, and then later the debate after it. And if you are a PBS viewer, I know many of you are, including our good friend Rudy, who watches it daily, the debate follows the contenders at 8 o'clock Eastern. Here to talk about it is my next guest, Maria Roach of the Contenders series, her production company, and others putting together this great series. It also is going to be featuring Gary Hart, who yours truly worked for in 1984 and to a lesser extent in 1988. Maria, great to have you on the program. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Jeff. Thanks so much for having me. Wow, what a day. Baseball and the debates and the contenders. I'm hoping your listeners are setting their DVR. It's a busy one.
They are indeed. I can tell you that. And, the fact is that it's history that we need to talk about. I just went through a little bit of an intro of the impact of Nirvana in the late 80s, early 90s that took place. And it was just a couple of years earlier, if you want to connect the dots, that 1988 campaign that Jesse Jackson came very close to being the nominee, eventually losing to Michael Dukakis. And Gary Hart came out as the favorite out of the 84 debacle of Walter Mondale. So all these kind of things kind of flow into our society in that time period. I was growing up as a college kid in the 80s, and it was fascinating entry into politics for me. But tell our audience what to expect tonight, because this is fascinating to look back. I credit you and Carlos Watson and others for putting together this idea. First of all, how did it come about?
It's such a great story. Carlos Watson, many people know him as an analyst, and he's made many appearances on CNN, on MSNBC. He is in his core a political junkie, but he's also he has web fame. He and his sister built educational software that was a huge success. And so he combined these two passions of his, just digital technology and information and politics, and created this program, the Contender 16 for 16, much along the same vein of ESPN's 30 for 30. I'm a product, I'm an 80s baby. I'm an MTV generation, born and bred. I was in high school when Reverend Jackson ran in 84, in college in 88. And so these are really pinnacle moments of my early entree into politics. And so, in fact, in 88, when I graduated from college, Reverend Jackson came and spoke to my graduating class, and I graduated from Hampton University in Virginia. And so for us about to enter into the workforce, to have a presidential candidate come and speak to our graduating seniors, and there I was with my twin sister, this was a moment in history, a moment in time where you really felt it's possible. I feel like I should start your show with Keep Hope Alive, because now I think so many people are feeling very hopeful. And that's what Jesse Jackson brought to his presidential campaigns, a sense of vigor, a sense of you can do anything. And so the program really takes a deep dive look at 16 past presidential campaigns and the men and women who took on this crazy journey. I mean, when you think about it, running for president is just crazy. The people who had the fortitude and the courage to do this, and Reverend Jackson was just one of those men. And he could have done anything. He was a protege of Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. There were so many things that he could have done, but what he saw in the 80s was a nation that was hurting. The people in the urban areas have been marginalized. Crack, cocaine had entered into these cities, much the same way that guns have entered into the cities and were devastating families, devastating infrastructure. Money wasn't coming in. President Reagan was just had his hand on the pipe and was squeezing the inner cities dry. And Reverend Jackson said, no, I need to start with first reminding people that I am somebody, that in your neighborhoods, in your homes, no matter whether you are a nurse, whether you're a janitor, whether you are a street sweeper, whether you are a doctor, a lawyer, a college student, I am somebody. And that still resonates today. Here, all these years later, we are looking at the end of President Obama's 8 years in office, and we're still grappling with the I am somebody, do I have a voice? I think Black Lives Matter show that there are communities where they don't feel like there's somebody. They don't feel like law enforcement is there to serve and protect. They don't feel like their elected officials are there to support all of their constituents. And it seems that some of these old issues that launched Dr. King and Reverend Jackson are creeping back into our society. And so I think we need people, like you were talking about Bernie Sanders, we need people who are part of the civil rights movement to remind us, hey, we fought for this, but you can't stop fighting. So I'm really, if you haven't noticed already, maybe the caffeine, but I am so pumped about the show on PBS. I
well,
just feel very
you
honored
should be.
to have had this opportunity.
Well, you should be. We're talking to Maria Roach, who's part of the really wonderful series tonight called The Contenders. Jesse Jackson, Gary Hart featured. She worked on the Jackson piece. I worked for Gary Hart in the 84 campaign as a college student, and again in 1988. A good friend of the program, a regular every Thursday on the show, is Jerry Austin, who was featured in your piece
Yes.
tonight, as is Frank Watkins, who's an occasional contributor to the show. So there's a lot of people who are connected to the Jeff Santos Show, including yours truly, who are I'm intrigued to see all of this tonight. just the footage from that time period. I know that that Gary Hart and Jesse Jackson were working on a lot of things, particularly early on in 1988, because they both had run in 1984. So they both share kind of an interesting connection. And I just look at that time period. It was just a year later that David Dinkins became the first African-American mayor of New York City, and a lot of people point to Jesse Jackson's successful run. Of course, it gave us at that same time that Spike Lee was doing Do the Right Thing, that David Dinkins and the whole episodes that have happened before that with Howard Beach and so forth, and all the incidents that happened in New York, all of that coincided in that time period. So I can only imagine, some of the conversations that you've had with Reverend Jackson and others talking about what was going on in that time period, which seems like to people like yourself and me you're very young at that point, seemed like yesterday in a lot of ways. But what were you most What were you most fascinated by, what Jesse and some of the folks were talking to you about, looking back at 1988?
What really fascinated me, Jeff, and again, thank you for including me. You mentioned Jerry Austin and Frank Watkins and Gary Hart, and then I just can't even believe that here I am on your show talking about these issues with such amazing people who I think were just very selfless in the work that they did. And what was fascinating to me was, driving to a TV station in Baltimore this morning, and I hear talk on NPR about Bernie Sanders being the first presidential candidate or the only presidential candidate this year to go and meet with the Navajo Nation. That was Jesse Jackson. Jesse Jackson in '84 was the first national candidate running for president to meet with the LGBT community. He was the first candidate to sit in the home of patients struggling with and suffering and ultimately dying from HIV/AIDS. He was the only candidate to go and meet with the Native American tribes. He went to West Virginia and met with the miners. He was in Iowa meeting with the farmers. It's amazing the groundswell of people. He had strong support from the farming industry because he talk to them. And I think that if anything can be gained from watching this show and this walk through history by the candidates running right now, you have to meet the people. You can't say, I want to be your president, but yet I don't want to go and meet with you and talk to you. And that's really exciting to me. It's exciting when I see the ability for someone to look at history and implement it today in their contemporary lives. I think Reverend Jackson is a real blueprint for how to be a public servant. He really walks the walk and talks the talk. If you go to Rainbow Push's headquarters in Chicago, you wait around for about an hour. Invariably, if he's not out of the country, you're going to see Reverend Jackson, and he has a big hug for you, and he loves to talk about the work that they are still doing at Rainbow Push. And it's because of that ability to mobilize. It's that ability to really listen and enact meaningful change in the lives of the communities and his constituents that he has this legacy. And I would really, I would just faint if I saw someone else kind of take that blueprint and run with it the way that President Obama did. I don't think it's a red and blue issue. I think it's really about service. And I hope that we see much more of that and not some of the bickering and the mudslinging that we've been seeing of late.
If it's okay, Maria, I want to just extend this a little bit and bring in a caller or two. Our next caller, our first caller, is Rudy, who's a longtime listener and a very big fan of PBS. And I know we'll be watching tonight, Maria. So if you don't mind, let's talk to Rudy in Chicago. You're next with Maria Roach of the Contenders.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Rudy.
Hi, Jeff, and hi, Maria. I've been watching
PBS
since PBS was born. I helped deliver it as an observer. Now, I would recommend to the people that call into this program and people who care about the country and politics, review PBS each day to see what they're showing. The Republicans have tried to defund PBS as much as they could. PBS used to get a lot of money from the government for the public viewing, and it got, cut out by the Republicans. Now, that's why they have to put ads on from corporations. Now, this is the season of debates. On PBS last night on Independent Lens, the Gore Vidal-William F. Buckley Jr. debate, 90 minutes. And It was something. I remember it, but I didn't have a copy of it. Now I got a copy of it. And William F. Buckley really shot himself in the foot. He says to Gore Vidal, I'm going to plaster your face, and it's going to stay plastered. He threatened and lost his head in that one debate. So Gore Vidal did a number on him. Yeah. And Gore Vidal was, he was just a great liberal.
Well, one of the things, Rudy, if you hold there for a second, I wanted to ask Maria, is that, PBS for a while, had a tagline that says, if we don't do it, who will, kind of thing, or words to that effect. Right. And, that to me is the real jewel of PBS, because you're going to be able to watch tonight. You're not going to be interrupted by, a 30-second commercial, selling, some sort of enhancement issues or, 6 commercials in a row. You're going to be able to watch something that's done by a group of professionals like yourself and Carlos Watson and others. And, I think that there are very few, speaking as a progressive journalist, an independent journalist, there are very few places where you're going to see that. And I think that's an important part about what people will be watching tonight. Your thoughts on that?
Oh, I absolutely agree, Jeff. Thank you so much, Rudy. You make so many great points there. For me, that's what's really exciting is to see someone like Carlos Watson, who has built this network and the successful website, Ozy.com, that's OZY.com, partner with PBS and say, hey, we have these resources. We are huge supporters of PBS. Let's partner and produce this programming. And this happened really fast. It makes your head spin kind of fast. And Ozy skews to a younger audience. And so it's a great partnership between Ozy and PBS to bring perhaps viewers that PBS doesn't normally receive and to bring them to look at these campaigns, the response from the first episode. So many people didn't know about Shirley Chisholm, the first African-American to run a national campaign for president, and a woman. And Shirley Chisholm was a teacher. And I think that it's quite exciting. My children have been watching the programs along with me and my husband and are learning so much about the political process in America, and that it really isn't just for the billionaires and the reality TV stars, but it really is for everyone. And it's quite exciting to me. And yes, the government needs to fund PBS, but yes, I need to make my contribution too, so that whoever is in office, PBS should not be reliant on politics. PBS needs to be around for ever. I grew up watching Lin-Manuel Miranda and the Electric Company, and to now see him on Hamilton, it's just amazing. He has transformed Broadway with a gift that he first gave to children, to me. So that's really exciting. I guess I can't say to me, really to my children, because I've got a few years on Lin-Manuel. But PBS is just a gift that keeps on giving, and we really do need to make sure that that gift never dries up. I know I'm doing my part, and I hope everyone else will do the same.
Well, I tell you, we're running out of time here, and Rudy, thank you for the call. The fact is that Maria, this is what we need to know, because as many people have said, without Jesse Jackson, there is no Barack Obama.
Exactly.
They're for the same reasons and similar reasons. Particularly the issues of what Gary Hart was talking about, and particularly on foreign policy. We don't get Howard Dean and people like Bernie Sanders, because
exactly right.
It all the foundations that are built each decade, and I think that's why it's so important. And there are, like I say, very few venues that bring these stories together, and that's why PBS is so important to our culture, and to learn many millennials who are now in politics to know who these folks are. Your final thoughts, Maria?
Absolutely. Well, and also to extend what you were saying, Jeff, and independent media, the Jeff Santos Show, you are providing such a tremendous service, and I'm honored to participate. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you very much. Check it out tonight, folks. The Contenders, 8 p.m. Eastern Time on PBS. I know I will. Thank you, Maria. We're right back with Mark Taylor-Canfield after this timeout.